Okay, part two. Rest in peace, journalism. That's what we're going to call this. So we just talked about how yellow journalism and its definition started to change society. People started to appreciate it for its over-the-top nature. They started to buy into the sensationalism. And with the background of the Spanish-Cuban conflict as the issue that they used to promote this type of journalism, something actually happened. As I mentioned, this was the first press-driven war. And America was moved by this sensationalism. In fact, in New York itself, where all these newspapers existed, the commissioner of police, by a guy by the name of, maybe you've heard of him, Theodore Roosevelt, was very moved by this. He re-enlisted in the army. Because America, thanks to these two giants in the journalism industry, got the government thinking, yeah, maybe it would be a good idea for America to be involved in the Cuban-Spanish conflict. And they began what was then, later, the whole conflict changed to what we now call the Spanish-American War, which took place neither in Spain or America, but Cuba. Teddy Roosevelt was, of course, one of the benefactors of this war and the sensationalism that drove it, as he and his so-called Rough Riders charged up San Juan Hill and ended the war and won it for America and the U.S. Army, and he came home to a hero's welcome and used that to catapult himself into the Oval Office of the United States. Think of it. If there was no journalism war between Hearst and Pulitzer, and no yellow journalism that responded, and no pushing of this war, there might not have been a President Roosevelt. To me, that's pretty history-changing. But its effects were much more long-lasting than that. Yellow journalism was now a new arrow in the quiver of all newspapers, and later, the arrow in the quiver of all types of media that sprung up in the 20th century. Radio, television, talk shows, cable news, and social media. And it exists to this day as a result. We don't call it yellow journalism because it's become so commonplace that it's now just called journalism. And that's sad. But that's what it is. It is what it is. Now, in a weird irony, the award that has been given for decades, going back 100 years for all I know, to the best work of literature in various categories in any given year is actually called a Pulitzer Prize. That's right. These stalwarts of dissemination of news, these so-called journalists today, but back then they even did it, when Pulitzer was still considered a hero, for some reason, they actually named something that is awarded to good journalism, although nowadays that's even questionable, after the guy who co-founded yellow journalism. Now you explain to me how that works. That would be like naming, the Peace Prize after Hitler. Oh, that might be a stretch, but you get my drift. I mean, of all the people you would pick to name the best work of literature after every year, You wouldn't think that one of the two guys who started yellow journalism, or was named after it anyway, would be on that list. Just saying. Leave it to journalism, right? Anyway. I just find that to be nutso. You know, Pulitzer might have done some good things. He might have invented things like the comic strip, but, you know, yellow journalism. Supposedly it was a bad thing. Even though it improved circulation and it actually did the work, the trick, and it actually made millionaires into multi-millionaires out of Hearst and Pulitzer. And Hearst went on to become one of the richest men in the country, the most powerful men in the country in the early 20th century. Doesn't mean people still thought yellow journalism was suddenly a good thing. They still thought it was crap. It took 100 years for it to be not crap. But there you have it. So let's talk about the history that journalism has had on the effect of rewriting history over the last 100+ years. Some of this might actually predate yellow journalism, because like I said, we weren't journalists were not pure as a wind-driven snow before they coined the phrase of yellow journalism. Those guys just made it a thing. But most of this is since then, as we see how journalism has degraded in its integrity over the years. This is in absolutely no particular order. It's just how it came to my head. I literally have 23 main events in history that have been changed for the worse. Rewritten history thanks to journalism. There are a lot more. They came to me even after I wrote this list, but you get the gist of what I'm talking about. Journalism has become a powerful tool and a powerful thing. And when bad people run powerful institutions, bad things result. As our founders said, the whole idea of America only works if good men do good things. If bad men do bad things on behalf of the country goes into the crapper. And if bad people doing bad things take over journalism goes in the crapper. And that's what's happened. So let me just rattle this off. Again, no particular order. How the left in journalism has rewritten history. Now, so I get this in the correct context here. This is not all just journalists rewriting history. A lot of this is other people changing history because they were told by journalists lies, exaggerations, the mongering of scandals and the rest. The aspects of yellow journalism in society has often led to other people who are not journalists to push a left-wing agenda and a rewriting of history to suit their own purposes. So not every one of these is directly from journalism, but they are indirectly as a result of bad journalism. 1. Republicans became the anti-black group, and Democrats pro-black, historically. Also known as the Big Switch, which supposedly occurred in the 1960s. It didn't actually happen. There was no switch of anything, but journalists, with the help of the left and the Democrat Party, helped push this myth in order to obscure the horrible past of the Democrats and to lay blame at the feet of Republicans for their own political purposes. 2. The KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, is right-wing. That's a myth perpetrated by the left with the help of the media. 3. Fascism is right-wing, exclusively and historically. And we've had a whole video about how this is complete crap, that fascism started out left-wing, it continued to be left-wing, and is even pervaded by left-wingers today, even if they don't know it. 4. America is institutionally racist and oppressive. No. There are oppressive people, there are oppressive organizations, but the America itself, its meaning, its founding, the ideas that behind it, the things that uplift it and hold it up aloft are exactly not racist or oppressive. The exact opposite of that. We were founded to fight these things for the good of man. There are a lot of people in this country who are taught that we have an oppressive, racist country institutionally. And this is just, again, bad people in charge of powerful institutions doing bad things. But these are separate and apart from America and its meaning and its founding. And the left wing, and with the help of the media, like to blur that line to make them think it's the same thing. 5. America is a nation which invades and forces its cultures on the world. Again, false. Throughout history, stronger cultures have always overridden weaker ones. It is not the fault of a stronger culture that the weaker culture can't maintain its culture. But in the past, this has occurred when one culture, the stronger, invaded, conquered, beat in a war the weaker culture. America is not that. They are not conquerors, invaders, occupiers. They don't do that. They're drawn into a war. They win the war. They occupy areas in order to put that country back on its feet, and then they leave. If the American culture was weak, then other countries wouldn't take it on. They wouldn't take on aspects of our country. They wouldn't take on our rock and roll and our Coca-Cola, and they wouldn't, dance to our songs and our dances, and they wouldn't speak our language. But America, at least historically, up until the last few decades, was this strong, did have this impact on the world. They saw how successful we got and how quickly we got successful, and they wished to emulate it. That is not America's fault. The common spread of freedom and equality and capitalism in the world would only result in good, I believe. So this isn't even a bad thing, but they try to make it sound like a horrible thing. 6. 9/11 was a government conspiracy, and George W. Bush knew about it beforehand. Also known as the truthers, getting their 15 minutes of fame trying to explain how such a bad thing could happen, because obviously it couldn't unless people high up in the government allowed it to happen. Truth of the matter, George Bush was given a lot of information about what was going on with Al-Qaeda and other groups. The Clinton administration told them that they've been having trouble with these people, and at some point something's going to happen. And even right up until days before the 9/11 event occurred, the chatter and the intel information, hearing the chatter, was telling them something was going to happen. The problem was they didn't know what, they didn't know where, and they didn't know when. I'm sorry, but unless you are a omnipotent being, it is not possible to stop an event, even if you know it's coming, if you don't know how, if you don't know where, and you don't know when. George Bush was supposed to know all this? 7. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Well, we've covered this as well. There were. Everyone said there were until it was politically expedient to say there weren't. Period. 8. wall of separation between church and state. No. As I wrote in my book, and I've mentioned in a previous video about the First Amendment, that is a made-up term, or a misinterpreted term for political purposes. The wall between church and state, so-called, started when the Danbury Baptists in Connecticut were worried that the new government that was being created by the founders of our country was going to harm their ability to practice their religion. Baptism at the time was a minority sect of Christianity in the United States. Most people were Protestant, I believe, Quakers, and some other things. Thomas Jefferson, wrote a letter to the Danbury Baptists where he described a wall of church and state existing which protects the Baptists and all religions from the tyranny of the new government. It protected them. It protected their rights to practice their religion, and that government will not interfere in any way. That is the wall of separation. It is not a wall that says that government cannot practice religion. It simply says that everybody else in the country can practice their religion if different. And that's a huge, important difference. 9. Voter IDs are racist. So let me get this straight, as you people have probably heard before. It's not racist for a minority person in this country to have an ID to get a credit card or to use a credit card. It's not racist to have an ID if you want to get a driver's license or a ID card. It is not it's not racist to have an ID to buy certain things. It's not racist to have an ID to do one of, there's probably 24 things that is mandates an ID in this country. None of that is racist. The only thing that's racist is having to have an ID when you go to vote to prove that you are who you are. And why do the Democrats and the left-wing people in the media want to call this racist even though it's not? Because the whole idea of having no ID when you vote is to allow people to cheat when they vote, to vote more than once as different people, etc. And that helps the Democrats. That's the only reason. It has nothing to do with racism, has nothing to do with fairness, has nothing to do with being minorities or black or brown people or any of this other stuff they like to throw out. It's because Democrats want more votes. Period. 10. McCarthy hurt Hollywood and found no communists in the government. Wrong on both counts, as I've mentioned in videos before. McCarthy had nothing to do with Hollywood. McCarthy was a senator. The organization in the government that was created, the committee that was created to watch communists infiltrate Hollywood, was HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee. House, as in representatives, not senators. McCarthy was a senator. He had nothing to do with Hollywood. Hollywood blacklisted itself. The government did not blacklist Hollywood. And as far as no commies go, I rattled off in my book 12 communists that were found as a result of McCarthy's witch hunt. More bogus crap still taught today, still pervaded by many people in journalism. And we'll continue this list in part 3. We'll see you then.